Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Khalid, but today is the 6th of April 2022. This will be on a discussion during the course of our show. We will begin with, of course, the latest as far as the Ukraine crisis is concerned. 41 days since the crisis began, both the sides are engulfed in a serious series of incursions, whereas the Ukrainian president demands that Russia be expelled from the United Nations Security Council. He says if the body fails to do this, it should be dissolved. He also talks about the different issues that pertain to his country and the number of dead bodies that have been found in different parts of Ukraine when he visited them. And of course, the images and the visuals have been shared on different social media platforms and on the news platforms as well. Moscow is facing, of course, accusations of these war crimes as the Russian pullout from the outskirts of Kyiv revealed these streets that were, of course, filled with dead bodies. At the same time, the EU is also weighing a ban on Russian coal imports. The EU Commission chief has called to ramp up pressure on Russia after these Bucha atrocities. This and more are going to be discussed in the first segment of our show today. The second segment of our show today concerns Sri Lanka and the economic crisis that has emanated, that has resulted in the current political crisis that has also engulfed Sri Lanka, whereas a lot of ministers have resigned, a lot of people have left the Sri Lankan government. The Sri Lankan president nevertheless refuses to resign. A lot of people are asking for resignation. A lot of people are asking for the reforms to happen quickly, and of course we are seeing a lot of crisis-like situations in Sri Lanka that include electricity shutdowns for 13 hours, plus also the necessity of oil and petrol that is in demand and is not enough in supply. Food is also something that is of extreme importance to Sri Lanka, and that is also not available full time. This is going to be our second segment, the economic impact and how it has affected Sri Lanka. The third news item is going to be the International Day of Sports for Development and Peace that is being celebrated today across the world. When it comes to sport, it is the best form of diplomacy between any two countries, and it has been the case between Pakistan and India in the past as well. Whereas sports is concerned, Pakistan has had a lot of achievements in the last few years and continues to move upwards in the trajectory as far as the sports arena is concerned. So this is our third story, and finally we are going to talk about Hong Kong, where traditional wooden coffins that are normally used in Hong Kong are running short, as there are a lot of patients that have succumbed to COVID-19, and there are not enough wooden boxes to be used as coffins for them. So of course the Hong Kong government has asked for more help in that regard. China is supplying them, but the supply is not enough. This is our last story. Let's come to our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the situation as far as Ukraine is concerned, whether it be the Ukrainian president that demands that Russia be expelled from the United Nations Security Council, and if that does not happen, then the United Nations Security Council needs to be dissolved. That and more is going to be discussed in our first segment. Ambassador Asif Durrani joins us online. Asif Durrani Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Do you feel that the Ukrainian ambassador's demand for the dissolution of the United Nations Security Council could happen?
No, I don't think so. The reason being Russia is member of Europe. There are 5 European parts which are members of the United Nations Security Council. And definitely, Indian president, he feels victims definitely have been, war victims. On the other hand, Russia also accuses Ukraine of atrocities, which also need to be probed into. This was a session about the so-called human rights violations in Ukraine. And definitely, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was addressing the session. His address was no doubt very emotional. He spoke about thousands of killing by the Russian troops, and also naming of many Russian, many Ukrainian nationals. When you talk about banning Russia from the UN system or throwing, quote unquote, from the UN Security Council, it is not so easy. That, by even by demanding like that, Russia can veto that power.
But when Zelensky, Ambassador Saab, when Zelensky says that it is time to reform or transform the United Nations system, do you feel that is also a possibility, or that also not possible in the near future, at least?
There's already a dialogue going on as far as reforms of the UN system is concerned, especially the UN Security Council, and in that, the use of veto is also on the top of the agenda since the early 90s. But there the issue is, number one, expansion of the Security Council, because the last expansion took place in early 60s. That's how the members, today we have 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent members. But apart from this membership, the demand is to expand the Security Council. And there is a split. There is a split between the countries. There are aspirant countries to become permanent member of the UN Security Council, such as India, Japan, Germany, and South Africa. But at the same time, there are countries which demand that instead of increasing the number in permanent category, there's a need to increase in the non-permanent category, and the UN should do away with the veto system, which has in fact created many a times roadblocks for the smooth sailing of certain issues. For instance, Israel, United States has vetoed so many times. In fact, all the time, whenever Israeli occupation is discussed in the UN Security Council, US, vetoes it. And same has happened during the Soviet Union's time. Initially, it had vetoed resolutions on Kashmir, especially after 1957. After the passage of many UN Security Council resolutions under Chapter 6 on Kashmir. And then there are many other issues when I can count on those, but because of the paucity of the time, I'll leave it at there.
All right. Ambassador Saab, I'd like to also understand where the Russian and the Ukrainian perspective are entirely different as far as the bodies and, of course, the images that have come out of Bucha after the Russian forces withdrew from them. As per the Ukrainian side, there has been widespread massacre of women, men and children, which has been shown through images, and as a result of that, tougher sanctions are on their way for Russia. On the other hand, the Russian side says that it is not behind this massacre. Who should we believe?
That's the problem. Whenever there's a war situation, truth is the first casualty. And if you look around now, so since there's a domination of the Western media, so you will not be able to see the version of the two sides. It is heavily, in fact, tilted towards Ukraine. Pakistan has condemned, has criticized the invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time, I think United States and NATO, they are also equally responsible for this situation, especially when the NATO has expanded eastward towards the Russian borders.
And that is the main issue that Russia had. In fact, it did not want Ukraine to be part of NATO. That was it. But it started from all of that and has come to this as we speak, the number of bodies and the incursion and the events that have culminated in a huge crisis in this area. When you look at Russia, I'd like to also quote Russian Ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Nebenzia, who says that to even even consider that the Russian troops could commit such crimes is unacceptable. He has accused the Ukrainian nationalists of staging the horrors in Bucha. He told the council that you only saw what they showed you. The only ones who could fall for this are the Western dilettantes. On the other hand, I'd also like to quote what the Ukrainian side said. Zelensky said that the Russian forces cut off limbs, cut the throats, women were raped, killed in front of their children, their tongues were pulled out because the aggressor did not hear what they wanted to hear from them. Who will the world believe? Because, of course, we know that the West has a pro-Ukrainian till we understand that as well. And there is a truth, you know, to all the bodies that have been found. There are men, women, and children who have been killed, and there is a huge crisis in Ukraine as we speak. But what is the way forward if all that we hear or see are allegations and counter allegations?
That is correct. Because if you look at the Western media, you see the lines of destroyed Russian tanks, which shows the successes which the Ukrainians are getting on the battlefield, and especially the anti-tank weaponry which has been supplied by the United Kingdom are eulogized and praised a lot. That in fact it has given Ukrainians the best way to defend their homeland. But at the same time, when it comes to playing up a victim's role, then of course that is also there. And since the access by the independent media is not there, for instance, which are non-Western, so there's a need for access to non-Western media which can cover the situation. United Nations Secretary General has demanded
an investigation into what happened at Bucha, in fact. What he has also said, and I'd like to quote what he said because you were talking of Antonio Guterres, he said this is one of the greatest challenges ever to the international order and the global peace architecture founded on the United Nations Charter because of its nature, intensity, and consequences. He also said that we are dealing with a full-fledged invasion on several fronts of one member state of the UN by another, a permanent member of the Security Council in violation of the UN Charter, and with several aims, including redrawing the internationally recognized borders between the two countries. Redrawing of the international borders between the two countries. What do you feel is going to happen? Do you feel there's going to be a new border because of the two states that came up and put pro-Russian allegiance, if you remember well, a couple of weeks back, and then it all intensified? What's going to happen as far as that is concerned, and how important will the role of the UN be in the light of what Antonio Guterres has said?
Well, I think one is doubtful whether the Russians are going to agree to that kind of investigations. But if there is some neutral investigation, perhaps, then they may succumb to that pressure. It all depends that who are going to be the inspectors who will go on the ground and report, objectively. But right now, on the propaganda side, I think the NATO member countries and their media, in fact, they have the field day. Yes.
Ambassador Saab, also Antonio Guterres has said that this crisis has led to a massive increase in the prices of food, energy, fertilizers. It has disrupted supply chains that we have talked in the past as well, and increased the cost of transportation. And he also added that 74 developing countries with a total population of 1.2 billion people are vulnerable as a result of this crisis. So it is just not Ukraine. In fact, it is going to the effect of this crisis is going to dissipate to 74 other developing countries, and I'm sure Pakistan is just one of them. How can one stop it? I mean, I know that peace negotiations are going on between the two sides. The last talks that were held between the Ukrainian side and the Russian side seem to be optimistic. Do you feel there is a need to have intensified negotiations now before it's way too late?
I think the fuel prices were going up even before Russia invaded Ukraine. So the oil politics was very much there, and I think there was a pressure from the United States in early stages on the oil-producing countries. And then, of course, in a way, a coalition was being cobbled together against China as well as Russia before the Ukrainian crisis. But once this war has started, definitely it has its own after effects, and one of that is price hike because there'll be shortages of the commodities, and more than that, the sanctions imposed by the United States and European countries that has further, in fact, negatively impacting those countries. So you have to take into account that as well. Yes.
All right, Ambassador Saab, when we look at the latest news as far as the Ukrainian crisis is concerned, the EU is weighing a ban on Russian coal imports. The call has been made by the EU chief to ramp up pressure on Moscow after these Bucha atrocities. The EU ambassadors are also going to meet as far as further sanctions are concerned. It is said that this is going to be the last set of sanctions on Russia, but nevertheless, these sanctions are going to be the strongest. Will Russia survive the sanctions?
I think Russia has the resilience. They have been through historically through lots of hunger and shortages of commodities, especially food, during the communist period or during the Second and First World Wars. This is not something new for the Russians. That has been there. But this time, I think Europe will equally suffer because here almost you can say 50% of the European needs were, catered by the Russian gas and oil and gas. So this is
This is
going to
very
be.
interesting. You, Ambassador Saab, you call for Russian oil and gas. I'd like to quote something that I've just read some time back today. And it was said that the Russian state-owned energy giant Gazprom continues to supply, and I repeat, continues to supply natural gas to Europe by Ukraine in line with requests from European consumers. And this has been officially said and quoted by the company's spokesperson. Do you feel that despite the issues that the countries have, and despite whatever problems are emanating between Ukraine and Russia, that there might be some kind of leeway to continue the oil and gas supply to Europe? Because you were talking of that, that's why I wanted to mention this.
No, reason is that there have been previous contracts which are being, in fact, honored. And this is true in the case of Germany, where actually the problem of mode of payment came, and now Russia is demanding that it should be paid either in ruble or in gold. So, and because they want to boycott the dollar. So, but till the time those contracts Russia is bound to fulfill. While they are in war with the Ukraine, but they are not in war with other countries. And the sanctions have been imposed not by Russia, but other countries. So I think here you have to look at it, and that's why United States or its NATO member states, they are not so harsh as far as fulfilling of the contracts, especially getting energy from Russia is concerned till the time that is over. After that, I think the United States is going to replace that, and United States is going to supply those energy resources 3 to 4 times at a higher rate than what they were getting from Russia. Yes.
But another question that emanates is how much of resources does the US have? For how long can it continue to supply, even if it's at a higher rate? And how much can the Middle East also supply as far as oil is concerned to those countries that have been plagued as per the Ukraine crisis? But only time will tell, Ambassador Saab. I would like to come now to the diplomatic crisis that also has emanated as a result of that. A lot of Russian diplomats from different countries have been expelled, whether it be from Italy, whether it be from Greece of late, whether it be from Lithuania. Despite that, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia says, and I quote, as per the Interfax news agency, that Russia wants to keep diplomatic ties with West despite these expulsions. Is there a a need for robust diplomacy to also avert this crisis?
Well, that's the way how diplomacy is conducted. Right now, Europe is on the, it's the European onslaught on Russia. So they are using all kinds of pressures, whether it's through economic sanctions or through diplomatic boycott, or say reducing the Russian diplomats' number in their countries. So these are the tools which are being used to pressurize Russia. But it all depends that how this war unfolds and how the dialogue between Russia and Ukraine proceeds, because there's also on the parallel dialogue going on between Russia and Ukraine to resolve this issue and to end the war. So it will go on for a while. And I think Russia will also, as a matter of reciprocity, will expel those countries' diplomats which have expelled Russian diplomats. Yes.
All right, Ambassador Saab, also I'd like to understand countries that want peace to prevail, countries that have remained neutral as far as this crisis is concerned. From this side of the world, it's of course Pakistan and China. We also see India that says, and I'll quote its foreign minister, that says that the country's government is working to stabilize economic transactions with Russia. Do you feel there's going to be a reaction from the West to countries that, if not neutral, are trying to side with Russia? Like, for example, I wanted to quote India in this case.
Yes, you're right. Because right now it is now Europe after the Second World War is for the first time witnessing war situation. They had tensions, but now they are witnessing war situation after almost 75 years. Earlier, the Asian continent and Africa and in Latin America, you could see the war situation and wars actually. But now, in order to pressurize Russia, they will and they are using all kinds of pressures. Of course, in Asia, you have, as mentioned, that China has abstained, so has Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. They have abstained. In Africa, in fact, 13 countries they have, in fact, and most important countries like South Africa, they have abstained, or they have, in fact, cast negative vote. Morocco has, in fact, abstained. And in Central Asia also, they have, in fact, abstained or absented themselves. So it is not that the West or US-led NATO countries, they have the upper hand as far as this politics is concerned. And there are countries which are also aware of the manner in which the NATO expansion has been taking place. The NATO countries have been pushing the envelope in order to put Russia under pressure. You cannot blame Russia of expanding its either borders or sending its troops anywhere out of their borders. So you have to make a distinction about that as well. And then you have to see also what happened in Ukraine since 2014 onwards, and how they have been flexing their muscles to join the NATO, and how those were prompted by the Western countries. So this, kind of a game has been going on for a while, and this therefore they will continue to pressurize Pakistan or India or other countries. Now look at India, which is a strategic partner of the United States, but it also
It continues to have strong ties with Russia and even have business ties with Russia as we speak, like I quoted the Indian foreign minister.
Yes, they have almost 50% of their weaponry is of Russian origin. In fact, many important military platforms come from Russia, and that is why the Indians have maintained a balance. Not only in the UN General Assembly, but since they are also a member of the UN Security Council, they have also maintained neutrality, and they abstained when voting took place about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So So it is not something which you can say that the world is fully supporting the American contention or the NATO countries' contention. Yes.
More or less the world is divided, and this situation is much more complex than it seems to the eye. There are so many factors that are kind of pulling together or pushing together in order to further exacerbate this current crisis. We just hope that negotiations are put forward above all the rest, and that some kind of non-military solution comes to this current crisis that is engulfing Ukraine. Thank you very much, Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the latest as far as Ukraine is concerned. 41 days since this whole Ukraine crisis began, 41 days since the most brutal casualty of it all is the people of the region. Let's come to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the economic crisis that has also engulfed Sri Lanka. It all started with an economic crisis, and now it has become a huge political one. More in the following report.
As the Ukraine war is driving global oil prices up, the financial fate of importing nations already battered by the COVID-19 pandemic hang in precarious new balance. Sri Lanka's economy has hit rock bottom, with protests spreading across the country over electricity outages, food and medicine shortages, and soaring prices. Demonstrations have roiled the country of 22 million despite emergency laws allowing troops to detain participants, a weekend curfew, and a brief ban on social media. Crowds have attempted to storm the homes of more than a dozen government figures, including the president's house in Colombo, where protesters torched the vehicles of security forces. Amid mass protests and demands for the president's resignation, Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's ruling coalition has lost its majority in the parliament. At least 41 legislators from Sri Lanka Freedom Party walked out of the alliance, whereby President Rajapaksa dissolved his cabinet and sought to form a unity government. Sri Lanka's largest opposition political alliance, the United People's Power, rejected the proposal to form unity government and urged resignation of the president. The government plans to negotiate an International Monetary Fund bailout, and the Washington-based lender stated that it is monitoring political and economic developments in Sri Lanka very closely.
Now, Qais Aslam, who's an economist, joins us online. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Qais Saab, when it comes to economy, of course, you know that it is something that makes a country work. When we look at the current situation of the whole world, there are so many crises, and economy is at the forefront, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be Ukraine, and here in this very segment we are going to talk about Sri Lanka. The latest data I'd like to share with you, and I'd like your opinion on that came last Friday, shows that inflation in Colombo has hit 18.7% in March, and this is the sixth consecutive monthly record. Food prices have also soared a record 30.1%. What do you attribute all of this to?
Thank you very much, sir. It's not one day. It's not immediate. There has been, if you remember, this president and his brother, the prime minister, had already a few years ago were ousted from power because of corruption. They came back, and the economy has not worked. There has been misgovernance. There has been human rights violations. As you said that it is 18% inflation, I think the data says that it has all in 2021 it went up to 61%. There is about $56 billion that Sri Lanka owes the world, especially China, and this year it has to pay $7 billion, and its reserves are only $2 billion. The prices, we have already said, of everyday life. The war between Russia and Ukraine has affected also.
So has COVID impacted Sri Lanka, in fact. Both the things exacerbated together, you know, they have kind of formed this.
Yeah, there are oil crises. There is no oil in the petrol pumps in the cars, and now there are riots. So economy has come to a standstill. So naturally that is going to affect the politics, and the politics is going to affect the economy. Things are very serious. I just want to add that you have to make an elegy of the whole situation with Pakistan. And here also the opposition has and the members of the parliament have defected. Here also the parliament has been dissolved. Here also, the inflation has risen. We don't have people on the street, whereas in Sri Lanka, uh, after independence, they did not have such type of crisis which they are facing now, and there are human rights violations also. So
Of
the
course, since
crisis is there,
1948, as you
both in
yourself said, since the
terms.
independence from Britain, Sri Lanka, this is the worst crisis that Sri Lanka is engulfed in. Now, when we look at the shortages, you've talked about food shortages, about diesel shortages, due to which the people have come out on the streets. There's also electricity shortfalls and electricity clampdowns for 13 hours and more, due to which the state-run hospitals cannot work properly. How can a country function in that way, and what is the first thing that, in your point of view as an economist, Sri Lanka needs to do? Should it contact the IMF? Should it contact friendly countries that it is in good touch with to get more loans? I know it is getting loans from India as we speak. India is also supplying wheat to it. We also know that negotiations with the IMF are also about to begin. Which is the first probability that should be on the top of the list as far as Sri Lanka is concerned?
Look, the dialogue with IMF is only going to ease its debt retirement issue, but it is not going to ease the shortfalls. So I believe it has to depend on both its neighbors, China and Sri Lanka, and maybe in the region, both for oil as well as food and basic necessities. I don't know why they are not depending on their own resources, but that is maybe a long-term process. But it should get help from the, we should not look at the geopolitical situations. We should look at the survival of the people and the survival of the state, not the government. So I believe that only the regional friends can help in this situation.
I mean, talking of regional friends, the only friend that Sri Lanka is citing here is India. India, it says, is giving an additional credit line of $1.5 billion to import essentials. This was said, and I quote, by the Sri Lankan central bank governor. And also a $1 billion support has been already extended by India to help pay for critical imports. This was when Mr. Rajapaksa, who was the Sri Lankan finance minister, traveled to New Delhi earlier in the month of March. Shouldn't other countries also come forward, those countries at least that can afford to?
I think the Gulf state can offer a respite in oil so that the energy crisis, there should be a respite in energy crisis. As you are already pointing out, the hospital should work, the transport should work, the school should work. So I believe that whether it's the guarantee from the IMF or otherwise, I think the regional SARC should become very effective in this whole thing. I'm sorry to say that SARC has not been effective in solving problems of the region.
That is unfortunately a sad reality, Dr. Saab. That is unfortunately a very, very sad reality. And one of the major countries who have hijacked SARC is unfortunately our not so friendly neighbor India. But in this whole scenario where Sri Lanka is engulfed with a huge, huge crisis, what should be the reforms that Sri Lanka should undertake in the immediate?
Look, the immediate is technically the food crisis that there is. And I always believe that the government should give subsidies for food. And I believe that the immediate is that it should get oil from the countries that can provide that oil. Although I'm pretty sure in today's world crisis, the Gulf nations might not be giving free oil. They'll be having very strict conditionalities. But at the same time, survival is very important. So tightening its own belt, I think political crisis will not, the government should go for elections, but going to the street is not the answer to the crisis. It is
It's going to worsen the already worse situation in Sri Lanka, in fact. You know, it is not going to help anything. Nevertheless, the people are extremely angry because there is no food, there is no paper, there is no electricity. So what can they do apart from coming out on the street? Nevertheless, the Sri Lankan president refuses to resign, although there have been certain resignations that have come forward. When a government loses a parliamentary majority like the Sri Lankan president has done, and the protests are mounting, if elections are going to cost the government a lot, and under these certain conditions maybe they cannot go for elections because it has a huge economic ramification as well. What should it do then? Should it have some kind of an interim setup without involving elections, or should there be some other solution?
I believe that immediately there has to be an interim government which people can trust. Immediately there has to be an interim government, maybe of technocrats, or a combination of both the opposition and the government, which the international community trusts. That is very important. The trust in a government by its people as well as by the international community is going to help it come out of the crises in the context. But one thing I want to say to you, that nations like ours, whether it's Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Bangladesh or such countries, the problems are chronic, and countries that do not invest in their human capital will come to this extent. Countries that do not invest in their own natural resources will come to this irrespectively crises. And if we do not, especially I'm talking about Sri Lanka, if we do not talk about governance and catching the corruption of the elite, the crisis will come. And it has come for Sri Lanka, it is going to come for Pakistan, it is going to come for other countries. We understand that these countries have resources. They have a large elite which eat up those resources. So somewhere a mix of the so-called capitalist free market economy and control and command economy has to come in, so that we come out. I'll call it the Keynesian economics reforms, which bring them out of such crises in the short run.
All right. Apart from the Asian economic reforms, there's also the humanitarian angle to it all, and you mentioned that Sri Lanka was going through a humanitarian crisis as well, and the human rights record is not that good as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, and that has put the alarms as far as the UN Human Rights Council says that it says it is closely watching the situation as it emanates in Sri Lanka because of the huge arrests that have been made of the people who were, of course, protesting on the street. There are too many problems that have engulfed Sri Lanka of late, I mean since a year or more, whether it be on the economic front, on the human rights front, and on the political front. What should be the priority for Sri Lanka, and how should it go forward so as to tackle all three at the same time?
Look, I think three things need to happen, and this is not only the economic issue. Number one is that the government should give way to a more popular people who can administer. Number two is that the agreements with China and with IMF, with India and with Gulf countries should come up to a solution where the country's sovereignty and economic well-being has to be taken care of. And number three, the issues of governance, new regulations, new laws, very strict laws against corruption and against those who take out the money should happen. But the question of debt retirement is whether China and IMF and India are ready to accept the situation. I think they will. I'm pretty sure IMF will not let a member country default. But at the same time, it needs a credible pro-people government which abides by human rights, which abides by economic realities on the ground. And that is the only answer to the problem of Sri Lanka.
And your point of view, Dr. Saab, who should be put at the helm of economic affairs in Sri Lanka? I'd like to quote the former Justice Minister Ali Sabri, who was appointed as Finance Minister on Monday. But he had replaced the President's brother, Basil Rajapaksa, but he resigned just after 1 day in office. If politically people are not willing to take the helm of affairs as far as the economy is concerned, because there are so many issues concerning with it, who should be put at the helm of affairs so that economy could maybe come two steps back from the current situation, at least, that it is embroiled in?
Look, I'm pretty sure Sri Lanka, like Pakistan, would have good people, honest people, technocrats, economists on the ground. The question is whether the politicians are ready to accept them. But the issue is, I will not recommend economic hitmen from abroad. IMF supported, they will not solve the problem. Anybody who is from the ground, they would have very educated people there. They should make a committee of economists with different views, and their consensus should be what should bring out Sri Lanka from the crisis.
All right, you talked about countries like Sri Lanka using its own resources in order to, remove itself from the current impediments that it is embroiled in, whether it be economy or politics. Let's talk of economy. What are the resources that Sri Lanka has internally that it could benefit from?
Look, it is an island. It has the sea resources, which it should very efficiently. I think it should bring in foreign investments for increasing its revenue from fisheries of different kinds. Number two, it is a tourist resort. It has always been a tourist resort. It should again bring in different experts, foreign investments in its tourism to rejuvenate it. Number three, it had an export promotion zone. It should promote that export promotion zone. Now the question is, what it can export is, I think, it's agriculture. It must have some light industry and some, as we call it, cottage industry. It should make it exportable. It had a contract with China for a port, but I think they cancelled it. And I think that is one of the problems, because then China wants its money back. So it should rethink about, it should not look at, it should balance itself between India and China in that context. But I think it should promote competition among market forces so that they can export quality product and grow food. I think Sri Lanka should not have food problem, because it's a rice-eating country, it's a rice-producing country, it's a fish-eating country, it's a fish-producing country. So why is there that problem? I think it is only about corruption and misgovernance.
All right, so that needs to be tackled, and that needs to be tackled, as you said, internally and without taking much of the help, because as you said, IMF will not help the current crisis. It will help alleviate what the debt situation in Sri Lanka is, but it will not alleviate the current economic crisis that Sri Lanka is embroiled in.
And IMF is never a solution.
And that the only solution is for a country like Sri Lanka. So, of course, as you said, a country like Sri Lanka needs to move inwards, look inwards, in order to find solutions that could help it sustain itself and come from the current situation that it is present in, whether it be economically, politically, or otherwise. Thank you very much, Dr. Qais Aslam Saab, to have joined us and to have talked to us in detail about Sri Lanka and the current crisis that it is embroiled in. Thank you so very much. That was Dr. Qais Aslam, leading economist, talking to us about Sri Lanka. So many parallels between Sri Lanka and other countries. Let's come to the last two stories, ladies and gentlemen. The first concerns the International Day of Sports for Development and Peace that is being celebrated today. The theme of this year is securing a sustainable and peaceful future for all, the contribution of sport. This, of course, takes place annually on this very day, on the 6th of April, and it is an opportunity to recognize the positive role that sports plays, whether it be to improve diplomatic relations between countries, whether it be also to improve the internal strifes or strifes between nations. Sports has played a very important role, whether it be through Olympics, whether it be through cricket tournaments that we have seen so far. We've seen Australia and Pakistan. That increases, diplomacy and improves diplomacy between countries. India and Pakistan have had so many matches together. Cricket diplomacy is one such aspect that has happened, and that has helped both the countries move forward. Sports in any arena is extremely important. When it comes to Pakistan, whether it be cricket, whether it be football, whether it be squash, whether it be taekwondo, whether it be the so many sports that Pakistan excelled in, Pakistan should be proud of itself, of the accolades that it has received in the different sporting arenas. We need to improve this, diversify this, and make it a more common feature as far as sporting events between different nations are concerned, not only in the field of cricket but also in other fields, and that is not only going to help us garner a better image as far as our sports are concerned, but also improve our relationship with so many other countries. So, of course, today, the International Day for Sports for Development and Peace. Development, peace and sports now go hand in hand. Our last story, ladies and gentlemen, comes from Hong Kong, where at the beginning of this month, 1 in about 20 people have recorded to have COVID was dying, but there are not enough coffins, unfortunately, for people to bury their loved ones. This has created a lot of panic because of COVID, people cannot go and see their loved ones even when they pass away, because there needs to be the protocols that need to be forwarded. At the same time, they cannot even bury them properly because there is a lack of wooden coffins. Now, China is supplying Hong Kong with the needful, but it is unfortunately not enough due to this pandemic, due to COVID-19. The overall tally of infections since the pandemic currently began stands at 1,174,560, with 8,262 related deaths. Now, there are fewer infections in buildings that are subject to lockdowns. Nevertheless, Hong Kong, as you know, it's a very crowded city, and therefore there are a lot of problems as far as this accumulation of people is concerned, and the lack of SOPs that causes the COVID-19 as well. So, of course, let's hope Hong Kong comes out of this situation, and that the necessary number of coffins are provided to Hong Kong so that they can bury their loved ones. They need to help the people in Hong Kong achieve this. We can only hope for the best for them. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories, segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. In the meantime, stay safe, have a blessed fast, and I'll see you tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.